Colony Wars Vengeance is the 1998 sequel to the first Colony Wars game. It was made by most of the developers from the original game, so you'd think this would mean it's pretty similar to the first one. However, there's a lot that's changed in this game, so it's a refreshing experience except for the oddities, which we'll get into. Let's check it out. This might take a while. I'll give you a quick rundown. You play as Mertens, which in contrast to the first game, is an actual protagonist with an actual voice who's a member of the runners-up of the war from the previous game. The Earth Empire's navy was sealed off in the Sol system and left to rot, but after a century, they managed to break free and wreak havoc once again. It's essentially a role reversal where you play as the bad guys from the previous game, except the League is now portrayed as an organization of terrorists, and the Empire were mere victims. So with what we now know from both the first and second games, there's no clear good guy faction. Both have been shown in a negative light, so it's debatable on who the good guys truly are now. But given that the Navy still considers Pluto to be a planet, I'm putting my money on the League. Being made only a year after the first game, the level of quality with the visuals hasn't changed much. What has changed is the art style, which is considerably different compared to the first game. The ships of both factions are completely different now, which kinda makes sense considering that this takes place a century after the first Colony War. While the new League ships look pretty cool in their own way, I really like the design of some of the Navy ones, especially their fleet craft. Each of them is still different enough in their design and colour to tell them apart instantly, but this time it's blue ships good, green ships bad. There aren't many assets that are reused here, as just about everything that you see in the game is brand new, which helps distinguish this game from the first one. But one of these that stands in contrast to the first game is that Earth now looks healthy again, instead of the orange-yellow that it used to be. However, it's clearly been mirrored for whatever reason. When you go to other star systems later in the game, you can see the exact same mirrored Earth again. I don't know who they were trying to fool with that one. The mission environments are still mostly in space, but they still try to make it look a little interesting by having planets close by and hues of colour on the space itself. But there are missions that now take place on the surface of planets, which is a nice change. Each of them are unique in appearance, but the classic PS1 fog does show up here, so you win some and lose some. When it comes to the game's audio, once again, just about everything has changed, with almost no similarities.
Shields destroyed.
One of the first things you'll notice with the sound effects is that now you have pew-pew lasers that fit right in with the sci-fi setting. All of the impact noises are completely different as well. Now, when you attack the shields of a ship, they sound like the goddamn Hypnotoad. The music for Vengeance still retains a sci-fi theme to it, but it sounds somewhat less serious now. I think I'm right in saying that it kinda sounds even more like a classic sci-fi movie, while dropping many of the dark and brooding themes from the first game. While it does fit the game and its change in overall style, it still gets cut off from the in-game voices, but it happens even more now. Your ship's info system announces things more often, which will keep restarting the music tracks throughout the missions.
Pod released.
The voice work is something. During the missions, they no longer have the effect that makes them sound like they're talking over a radio. It's just a raw, clear voice that sounds like it's right next to you. This doesn't seem that bad at first, but once you start killing enemies... I get the feeling this was supposed to sound like them screaming over the radio, but instead, it sounds like their souls are screaming right next to your ears as they get sent to the afterlife. Thank God this doesn't happen after every enemy dies. But they're not done messing with you yet, because even these little voice clips cut off the music.
My name, Mertens. All my life I've lived with civil war. A thief, murderer. Now I'm with Kron. Once our people are united, we, the Navy, will break out of Sol once more.
While the voice for Mertens sounds alright, the direction for most of the other voices seem to be off at times.
This is Navy battleship to Mertens. Long-range scans indicate a League presence in this area. We may need you to give us backup.
Navy battleship to Mertens. Give us some support from these fighters.
Bex to Mertens. League fighters approaching, old friend. Let's show them we're not here for the view.
With how nice they sounded in the first game, you might start to wonder how Vengeance happened to end up like this. But I did come across an interesting tidbit from an ex-developer, that the lead sound guy at Psygnosis quit just before the voice recording was done for the game, which may help explain a lot. In spite of that, there is still a good amount of diversity for the voices, with some sounding pretty humorous.
This is Navy battleship. We're low on fuel and can't stay inside much longer. You must get those mines out of our path.
If you were hoping for another in-game database with interesting and amusing entries, you're going to be disappointed, because it doesn't return for Vengeance. But more importantly, the space combat is still top-notch for the time. Dogfighting other ships and taking out fleetcraft is still as satisfying and fun as the first game. In a welcome change, you can now pick what ship you want to use for the missions, most of the time. You start out with only one ship, but you unlock more as you progress. Beyond that, there's only one ship that you're forced to use, which is a dropship for the planetary missions. All the ships have some pretty cool names, like Diablo, Wraith, and... oh no. Beyond picking your own ship, you can also upgrade them as you progress. You can improve their shields, engines, afterburners, and turn speed. You'll absolutely be wanting to do this, for reasons I'll cover later. You have a similar variety of weapons to choose from like those from the first game. Anti-shields, scatterguns, torpedoes. Most of the old gang is back. But they do give you some new toys to play with, like seismic lancers, particle guns, a special beam that can steal enemy shields to recover your own, and even little autonomous ships that can attack, defend, or repair other ships. The missiles have gotten a little overhauled too, as they're now a little easier to evade on your end. Lightning reflexes aren't a requirement to avoid them, which is a relief. There's a neat little feature now where an indicator will lead your targets for you when fighting other ships, which saves you having to guess where your shots will hit. Some welcome additions overall. The enemy fighters are still pretty dumb for most of the game, as they'll be easy targets for you to shoot at. Towards the end, they do get a little more challenging, but overall, the biggest threat they'll pose is towards mission objectives that you need to protect. This applies even more to enemy fleetcraft. There's a neat little feature now where you can target critical parts of fleetcraft when taking them on, like destroying their bridge, reactor, or engines. This actually plays a critical role in some missions where the only way to destroy some craft is to take out a specific part. Like in the first game, you can only save at the beginning of every campaign act. While there are only 41 missions in Vengeance compared to 70 from the first game, they do try to make them more interesting and varied to make up for it. There are less missions that tell you to go here and shoot everything, instead replacing them with more varied missions like go here and mine asteroids, or stealthily infiltrate this station and steal intel. Missions can occasionally be as short as those in the first game, however there are some missions that come in two parts, where you complete an objective in one area, then warp to another in order to complete another objective as part of the same mission. This helps keep things interesting, instead of just repeating the mission formats of the first game. The missions in Vengeance can tend to be way more tough than the first game, not necessarily because of difficulty, but because of how vague some objectives can be. Of course, they tell you what your objectives are before each mission starts, and they show them on the pause menu as a reminder, But sometimes you might do what you think you should be doing, but the mission doesn't progress any further. Or it just fails because you didn't do something specific that the game expected you to do. Take this mission in the mid-game as an example. You need to fly past a minefield, physically steal a whole research station, then retreat with it. The minefield is set to destroy the station if you're detected by it. So, I fly past the minefield, deal with some enemies, grapple the research station, and start flying away. Nothing happens no matter how far away I fly. I try flying towards where I think I started the mission, but there's no reference points or any marker showing where I need to go. No matter how long I fly, the objective doesn't complete. I try taking out some enemy turrets, but nothing happens. I then give up and try taking out the mines, which I know is probably a bad idea. Sure enough, the mission fails. I made another attempt on the mission by going around the minefield back to where I think I spawned, but I swear that I was hitting an invisible wall for some reason as I wasn't able to make any more progress. I still don't know how to complete this mission, nor do I care to at this point. This ends up being a big problem for the game, as some missions are a little too specific with what they want you to do compared to the brief and sometimes vague objectives that they give you. In addition to these, other missions will have an extremely small margin of error, which results in a mission failing if you lag behind even a little. These spikes in difficulty seem to be spread out throughout most of the campaign. It's not a good feeling when at least half of that difficulty comes from just trying to find the triggers that will complete the damn mission. I'm all for games that'll challenge you, but there comes a point where it's just frustrating. Thankfully, most of these missions are in the alternate campaign acts, so it's pretty much an extra incentive to do a perfect campaign run with no failed missions. If you do end up playing these missions, your safest bet is to use the best ship with as many upgrades as possible while praying to God. If you were a fan of the branching campaign structure from the first game, you might be disappointed by the one here, as it's more linear and it only goes in a single direction. But to be fair, it does still have its fair share of alternate scenarios and missions to keep it interesting. Because Vengeance has a more fleshed out story, the missions feel more central to the ongoing plot this time round. There are even some little twists that occur in the middle of some missions, which is a nice touch. So following the forced isolation of the Earth Empire and the Sol system, things got chaotic as they began fighting each other over the scraps they had left. A century later, an influential figure known as Kron rises up and unites what remains of the Empire's navy. The player character, Mertens, signs on and helps the navy with securing the last of the Sol system by taking out a rogue faction called the Tribe. It's still a better name than the faction. Mertens isn't alone in his quest because he has two wingmen backing him up, named Bex and Klein. After securing the system, the navy reopens the Sol warp hole and enters Galanaya, ready to do what the game's title suggests. This is the point where the campaign truly kicks off, so I'll be considering this as spoilers from now on. If you want to avoid them, skip to here. Ready?
What the hell was that?
Since the campaign goes in a single direction, but has some variables, I'll cover the best case scenarios that lead to the game's best ending. So once the Navy enters Galanaya, they manage to stay undetected for a while, and bring in a massive force before the League can act in time. After taking out a number of key installations, the Navy discovers that Galanaya isn't the League's capital system anymore, which means they now have to scour all the nearby star systems to find it. Kron isn't pleased by this, so he executes the intelligence personnel responsible for the blunder. The Navy decides to head for the Cronus system, which provides precious resources for the League. It's when you arrive here that the League's ace pilot, known as the Widowmaker, shows up. He says some fancy words, kills Klein, and then leaves.
I shall return for you, pilot. Although you may want to avenge your friend's death, I shall be waiting.
For some reason, the only way to fight him again is to play one of the alternate missions. This means that if you go through the campaign in the best possible way, the Widowmaker just shows up for this one mission as a mid-game villain, and then just disappears entirely, not even being mentioned again. Seems kinda strange, but whatever. The next system you go to is Alpha Centauri. At this point, Kron is growing more diabolical, so he creates the Space KGB to stop anyone who might threaten the Navy from within. Bex joins up, with Mertens forced to do the same shortly afterwards. On the first mission in Alpha Centauri, some space fishes and a space eel randomly attack you and the Navy forces. They're never mentioned again, so don't think too much about it. A few missions later, you find out that Bex is a traitor, so Mertens kills her, leaving him without any more buddies. By this point, the Navy has finally tracked down the League's home system, Boreas. Not long after arriving, an unknown force begins attacking both the League and the Navy. It turns out to be aliens. Not those ones from before, but an actual civilization that flies spaceships, so we've gone full sci-fi at this point. The aliens are too much of a threat for a three-way war, so the Navy and League decide to join forces, despite Kron still wanting to fight the League. Everyone just ignores him while they focus on the bigger threat. Mertens is sent to the home system of the aliens in order to close their warp hole by playing a puzzle game with some gemstones? You then fight off an alien ace pilot who straight up sounds like a cheap cartoon villain from the 80s.
I shall enjoy this battle. You shall perish for violating our systems.
With him gone and the warp hole closed, the aliens are defeated, but there's still one loose end left. With the Navy and League having made peace with each other, Kron goes nuclear and makes plans to fire a supergun at the star in the Boreas system, which would cause a supernova and kill just about everything nearby. Mertens destroys the gun and Kron tries to flee. You fight him in a 1v1 and end up defeating him. The big revelation afterwards is that Kron used to be a League pilot during the First Colony War, and he was left behind when the League cut off Sol from the galaxy. It turns out that the whole time, the only reason that Kron reunited the Earth Empire's navy is because he wanted vengeance on the League. Roll credits. There is a fan theory that Kron was actually the unnamed League protagonist from the first game, but at least one former dev has shot down this idea, so it's probably not the case. Anyway, that concludes the best path and ending for the game. Everyone lives happily ever after. Because the campaign only goes in one general direction, it's probably not worth covering all the alternate campaign acts and endings in depth. To summarize, most of the important plot elements still occur in these acts, but they can lead to some cool moments, like the Navy having to withdraw back to Sol after they first break out, and Mertens almost having the full space KGB experience. There are 5 alternative endings to the game, with most of them ending in Mertens being imprisoned by the League as the Navy crumbles. It's not fully known which ending is canon, as the next game takes place at the same time as Vengeance, but the old Colony Wars website states that Kron was defeated and killed 2 years after the start of this game, so the best ending may be canon for Vengeance from what we know. I've always felt that this game was vastly different from the first, for both good and bad reasons. It may be a little jarring if you play this right after the first game, but it's still an enjoyable experience if you liked the first game or any other space combat games. Some of the notable bugs in the first game aren't around in Vengeance, except for the model wireframes, but it does feel like a smoother experience. The combat is still as thrilling as it was in the original, which is probably the most important aspect. So at the end of the day, I'd happily give this a recommendation. Just be prepared for some unreasonable difficulty spikes. Physical copies are still floating around for Vengeance, so you can still play it if you want to do the old school method. There's one more game in the Colony Wars trilogy, one that I've barely played compared to the first 2, so it'll be interesting to see how this series ends. I'll see you next time for that review. Until then, take it easy.